In the world of Fear and Hunger, the gods are most certainly real, with the old gods essentially being the embodiment of concepts. But there is a question about their existence that's not often pondered. What came first, the concept or the god? It's hard to say exactly. The myths and fables around the gods seem to point to them existing first, with the old gods existing outside of humanity, unlike the new and ascended gods, and Sylvian specifically creating it, at least according to every book written on her. But mayhaps these tales are all lies. The only beings in existence that could corroborate them have long since abandoned the world. In their place are the new gods, a loose pantheon of lesser beings, humans given their powers by the old gods, who become in part chained to the schemes of the old ones. And of course there are the ascended gods, beings on par with the old gods in power, but who undeniably come from humanity. But only one of the ascended gods has seemed to eclipse the influence of Grogoroth and Sylvian, and that is Alll-mer, who also happens to be specifically famous because he started life as a man. The first time we get any info on the gods at all is in the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, where any of the Dark Priests will give us a basic description of them. Grogoroth, Sylvian, or Alll-mer the Ascended One. The original destroyers and creators. Grogoroth, he who is followed by death and destruction. The goddess, she is the opposite of Grogoroth, and brings forth new life and love. The Ascended One, he who died for our sins. He who binds us all together. Grogoroth and Sylvian are often spoken about together, even in the books specifically about them as individuals, while Alll-mer is always talked about separately from anyone else. As a distinct entity, Alll-mer is loosely based on Jesus, a creative choice which grounds the lore and makes it more accessible, something that's sorely needed, as the gods of Fear and Hunger are vague and esoteric at the best of times. But there are twists to the character. For example, both Alll-mer and Jesus were crucified, and both return 3 days later, though Jesus returns to life, talks to his followers, and about 500 other people, and ascends to heaven as a living god, commanding his disciples to spread his gospels, and while he was on the cross, he pleaded for mercy for his executioners. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And he's typically called the Redeemer. In Christianity, the wages of sin is death, but in theory, Jesus paid that wage on our behalf with his own death. Alll-mer conversely rose from the dead, empowered and emboldened, and slew the kings and new gods of his time, and ruled the world for 400 years thereafter. But Alll-mer's death also apparently paid the wages of mankind's sin, at least according to the Dark Priests, so make of that what you will. We don't have much information on Alll-mer outside of his skin Bible, but examining that we'll be given two different origin stories. The first is, the more common story speaks of a human born from a virgin mother, a mere mortal that had humble origins, but one that quickly rose to prominence because of his teachings, whose brutal execution somehow led him to ascending. The second story tells how Sylvian, the older god of fertility, ordered a deity known as Vitruvia to create an architectural reprography of a man and a woman that would be in the likeness of Sylvian herself. Sylvian would create mankind according to the design of Vitruvia, and while Vitruvia was delighted with mankind at first, the god would eventually change their attitudes. Over time, Vitruvia started to see small imperfections here and there. Nothing bothered her more than the idea that her designs were anything but perfect. So she set out to create the perfect human being, the pinnacle of man's potential. This being was born on the year nil, and he is the one known as Alll-mer today. Enki will point out the vast differences between these stories. One is about mankind ascending on their own terms, and the other is about Alll-mer being just another plot point in the greater scheme of the old gods, with Enki believing the truth lay somewhere in the middle. But when we look at other ascended gods, it becomes clear that the former is more likely true. The girl was not a design of the old gods, but rather the design of Nilvan, with Rare indirectly trying to stop her ascension, and Grogoroth himself will protest that the old gods had already gifted humanity with the ability to ascend. But Grogoroth is being totally disingenuous here. New gods are a facsimile of divinity, with Francois, Nashra, Voltiel and Nilvan clearly disagreeing with Grog or Gatekeeper. The logic is likewise not an invention of the old gods, but rather a creation of mankind, an example of humanity's endless march towards progress. The Old Ones clearly don't want any human being to reach their level, and Alll-mer may actually be the reason why. Both tales agree that when Alll-mer rose up and became the ruler of Mahab and the world, He venerated the old gods, and restored their ways to the world. Enki speculates that the truth of Allmer lies somewhere in the middle, but I disagree. I actually think it's both. Allmer the man may have sought ascension on his own terms, and the old gods may have complied or aided him, or at least one old god, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. Maybe we can gain more insight by exploring items and quotes that are in relation to Allmer. The Allmer blood sword will have the description: the blood of Allmer boils and rages, even ages after his death. Just a drop sends swords to the hearts of his enemies. The sword is an extension then of Allmer's wrath, and not the only one associated with him. Red Virtue, the sword wielded by the Heartless One, is also said to belong to the King of Mahab, who is most likely Allmer. The Spear of Longinus is also a spell linked to Allmer, its description reading: the spear that punctured Allmer's side as he was chained and crucified, a faint trace of the shadow that was cut away for Allmer to reach his ascension. Ooh, ominous. And of course, finally, we have the inverse crown of thorns, a glimpse of the pain and suffering Allmer, the Ascended One, endured on the cross. Can you feel closer to the god this way? If we use the ability, it will kill us straight away. And oddly, as we die, we'll hear a laughter. Self-martyrdom is not uncommon for Allmer worshippers, with the Dark Priests practicing it. But the Crown of Thorns feels different to that. It's just cruel for cruelty's sake. Allmer's powers are primarily high offense and high defense, but he also has other boons to present to mankind, like the blood portals or water walking. In a Prahivillian church, we can read from an open Bible and get this quote: "Eye for an eye leads to everyone being blind." But when everyone involved is blind already, there is very little to lose. Blind in your quest for power? I am blind in my quest for vengeance. Now, the Allmer Bible is likely akin to the Christian one, being split into New and Old Testament. And in the New Testament, Jesus himself said some bangers. "I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." Now, of course, here Jesus is referring to the divides his teachings would create in society, in its structures, and even in families. And this quote from Allmer could have a similar context. I have no idea what that would be, though. It really does seem like Allmer is saying, if you pursue vengeance, don't dig 2 graves, just hire a digger, which is a bit more Old Testament than New. Another quote we find comes from his priests: "Nothing is mine, and nothing is yours. All is that of Allmer." This seems like an innocuous enough statement at first view. It conjures the story of Job: "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh," with the idea being that the material world and its finery is pale in comparison to heaven, so one should endeavour to be faithful in the best and worst of circumstances. Although in this context, the priest is referring to tools that were stolen from a craftsman. It's a small detail, but it makes Allmer sound more like an oddly possessive god, with a seeming focus on materialism. Another quote comes from one of the Inquisitors we meet in town: "The will of Allmer knows no mercy. Infidels will be cut down without a chance for redemption." In my Dark Priest video, I pointed out that the Inquisitors were some of the hardest hit by the influence of Rare, in stark contrast to the Dark Priests. Both groups are Allmer worshippers, and you'd think they would have equal protection. The quote is especially interesting because Allmer, like Jesus, died for the sins of mankind, even according to other Dark Priests. It could just be, though, that the Inquisitors have totally lost their minds. Perhaps we can learn more yet from the Effigies. In Prahiville there are 3 effigies all in all. The first features a king hunched on a throne, but the stained glass window above depicts Allmer, getting his shoelaces tied, a tribute to Allmer's victory over the new gods and sultans, and likely a retributive act for his own humiliation on the cross. The second depicts a gaping maw of an unknown god. That may be a depiction of the Fear and Hunger god, given they're the only other ascended god that we know about, and the corresponding stained glass has an odd man dressed in green fighting an unseen foe. The third and most important effigy for this video is the one that depicts the crucifix of Allmer, covered by a long snake. In my Dark Priest video, I said the snake was associated with Sylvian and Lagarde, but I was wrong. It's also associated with the Dream Tower, and of course, Percule, whose hat is very snake-like in appearance. The snake in the Bible is the one who tempts Eve and causes mankind's fall. It's a deceiver. This idol then could be a form of blasphemy, or it could be hinting at something more sinister. Allmer is a stand-in for Christ after all, and despite being called a redeemer in the literal text of Fear and Hunger, Alll-mer himself seems to be a violent, revenge-filled monster. The cross is his own sigil, granting power to mortals who use it, but there is a sigil very similar to his, an upside-down cross with 2 triangles that can be found throughout Preheville, in the mold apartments, and in the museum clock puzzle, and it's even associated with at least one spell, Longinus. While the description talks about Alll-mer, it's actually a spell of the Sulfur God, who is an obscure and mysterious being, even by Fear and Hunger standards. Scarce traces of information can be found on the god. The first time we're likely to ever see the name is if we're playing as Osar and find Darn in the White Mold apartments. Darn is brooding over the Sulfur God's sigil, and he will ask us what it is. And Osar is the only contestant with any knowledge of it. Even Noshra, one of the game's most knowledgeable characters, is in the dark on what the god actually is, only telling Osar that it's ancient. This sigil, and the god associated with it, is what brought Darn to Preheville, and in my video on Darn I speculated that he wouldn't be able to find the answers he's looking for, but there are answers here, starting with the Sulfur God cultists. The cultists of Sulfur are few in number, but dangerous enemies, sadomasochists, in prime physical condition, and decorated in blue war paint. The first Sulfur cultist we encounter in Preheville is actually the first person in the game we talk with, the janitor. When we first encounter the guy, he's furious at us, and demands we get back to work. If we refuse, he'll fight us. For now though, we'll go along with the janitor's demands, and we'll find ourselves at a workbench, where we're forced to make wooden cubes. Eventually though, Rayla, the girl with the red shoes, will ask us to follow her, and if we do, the janitor will attempt to intervene, and should he defeat us in combat, he'll cut our legs off. Now get back to work, the janitor says. Anyway, shortly after that, the janitor leaves the area, and we won't see him again. With or without legs, we escape the workshop, and eventually find ourselves with Perculae. Now, the workshop is clearly a rare dimension. There are several throughout Preheville, and each one can be entered via activating a rare sigil, with activating the sigil again taking us back to the real world. Although throughout all of Preheville we can't find the real world workshop, we can find this very room again, by traversing the Golden Gates of Rare, something that can only be accessed by gaining affinity with the Moon God. And if the janitor wasn't killed during the intro, he'll still be here, trapped. But how on earth did he get here? He's not much of a conversationalist, so if we want to figure out who he is and why he's here, we're going to have to investigate. The mold apartments are a strange place in Preheville, totally unique to anywhere else in the city. On the outside it's a normal looking building, on the inside it's a building frozen in time. Darn will ask, what is this mold? It covers everything, to which Olivia will say, I'm not sure if it's actually mold. The texture is unlike anything I've seen. To which Darn will reply, rubbery and crusty at the same time. If we're foolish enough to sleep in the apartment, we too will be covered in mold. It's impossible to say exactly what the mold is, but it's definitely not a natural phenomena. And we know from reading the craftsman's note in the church that he was staying in this building, and he doesn't describe any weird mold. So this change is a recent one, possibly occurring at the same time as the first Termina festival, and upon doing a bit of exploring, it's not hard to figure out what exactly happened here. Somebody performed a ritual to Sulfur, and the building's current state is some kind of after effect of the god's presence. If we want to know the person's motivation though, we need to find their room here. We have to use a horse statue to smash through the floor, which I think has more significance than might initially appear. I would speculate that the horse is significant to Alll-mer, in the same way that the bunnies are to Sylvian, and the wolves are to Grogoroth. With this in mind, I do have to wonder if real horses in the game hold any significance, symbolic or otherwise. A dead horse can be found outside of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, and there are dead horses to be found in the Maiden Forest and throughout Old Town, though whether this was a deliberate attempt by anyone to be sacrilegious is unknown. Carved into the horse statue, and the four beneath it, is the Pegasus constellation. The person who lived in this room owned a telescope, and was likely looking at the stars before he carved it. The Pegasus symbolises creativity, freedom, and transcendence, themes that will become relevant in later sections of the video. Dropping into the room below, we'll find Darn staring at the sigil of Sulfur, and in its centre we'll find a diary. The diary of a killer. Reading it, we'll get this. Dream of the moon. The sign. The city is an upheaval. Fools. They don't know what awaits them. The moon is of no value to me. It is but a mark of a trigger. The time has come, and so is he. As you are my witness, I am ready, my lord. I have gone through this 1,000 times in my head. To finish the ritual, I need time. The laundry room works as a perfect hiding spot for the sacrificed. I will swear on your name, my lord. Our one true leader, the Sulf. The diary will list off the madman's victims. In the rare dimension version of the room, we'll once again find the sulfur sigil, but this time it'll be pulsing. Using the spirit board, we can talk to the ghost of one of the killer's victims, who will materialize in the bathroom. Run away. He is coming. Who is coming? The servant of sulfur. He used us as sacrificial lambs. While this discussion gives us no clue on the servant's identity, it does indicate that sulfur requires sacrifice to empower his followers. Similar to Grogoroth and Alll-mer. To be fair, it is possible that the janitor and the mole department murderer aren't the same guy, but it does make more sense if he is. If he was, say, the janitor of the mole departments, he likely would have had the building's master key, giving him access to every room in the building, making a potential killing spree much easier. But the man himself gives no clear indication of a previous life. The janitor we meet only seems to care about the cubes that it gets us to craft, cubes covered in the sigils of the old gods. Put a pin in that, by the way. But for now, we move on to needles. When we first enter the city of Predecessor, we'll hear a malevolent laughter, which signals the arrival of Needles. Needles is Termina's version of the Crow Mauler, though he's nowhere near as tough as the former Captain Rudimer. He's not somebody to be trifled with. Weirdly, the first time he defeats us in combat, he doesn't kill us. Instead, we'll wake up with our foot chained, and all of our party members gone. We'll be in Tunnel 5, and a strange red ghost will slowly approach us, and essentially sexually assault the player. We'll wake up with the chain off our ankle and we'll be free to leave. It's a strange episode, and doesn't really make a lot of sense. Needles, based on the face paint, is almost certainly a sulfur cultist, but sex and sexual violence by extension would fall under the influence of Sylveon. Every player character can be killed by the clown, with some of their bodies even being crudely displayed. I just don't get modern art. So if you want to keep your fellow contestants alive, it's imperative that you kill the clown as soon as possible. On that subject, he's difficult in a fight if you can't just outright destroy his head, especially in the early game. His arms are especially tough, boasting 1000 HP apiece. But even then it's unwise to destroy them, because he'll just immediately pull out a gun. And even if we win, we'll be stuck with a bunch of nasty status effects. Needles seems to leave the other creatures of Predecessor alone, having a singular focus on the contestants. Unless they moonscorch, in which case he just leaves them to it. Needles will attack us all over Predecessor, but for some reason will not come into the church, where we know the Crimson Fathers are, who are creatures born of blood that serve sulfur. Needles also seems to have a habit of taking trophies off of some of his victims. If he beheads Tanaka in Tunnel 7, he'll start wearing his hat, and if he kills Marina in the bookstore and flays her face, he'll start wearing that too. He's a unique being. He refuses to talk to us. Usually dialogue will just prompt him to laugh, unless Dawn is involved in the fight, and suddenly Needles will take it a lot more seriously. Upon death, we can have Dawn examine him, and he'll say this. His face, it's smeared with makeup and blood. His expression is still frozen in that of a shit-eating grin, despite having gone through a painful death. It can't be. Dawn won't tell us what has him so spooked by the dead clown, but if we're playing as him, we'll know that he recognizes Needles as the Baron Einar von Dutch, the man who trained Dawn in medicine, and who Dawn in turn taught the lore of the old gods, presumably by having him watch my videos. The last time Dawn saw the Baron, he was dead, from self-inflicted wounds, with Dawn's fiancée, the Baron's own daughter Elise, also dead, sacrificed by the Baron in a ritual to sulfur. We don't really know much about the Baron, only that he has an unusual fascination with the old gods. From Dawn's perspective, the man seems distant, but what we do know about him is that he was a respected and powerful medical doctor. While the Baron has the aesthetic appearance of Art the Clown, his character is actually more similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A common misconception about that character is that the two are a split personality, but that's not the case. In the book, Dr. Jekyll is an upstanding doctor of high Victorian morals who develops a serum that transforms his body, and when he takes the serum, he also takes on the alias Mr. Hyde. He then indulges himself in sin, violence, sex, drugs, before transforming back into the good doctor, with everyone none the wiser. But fundamentally, he is the same guy mentally and spiritually, regardless of what his appearance is. Now, this could just be a coincidence, but I do have to wonder if the sulfur cultists can simply wash off their face paint and take on their old aliases after they're finished indulging in their violence and depravity. Something of note, once we kill Needles, the body's muscles are still tense, as if he isn't really dead. And on the subject of people who aren't truly dead, in the deepest woods, we find a bunker. According to Abella, the technology is possibly a decade or two old, which makes me believe that this was the first bunker developed for the Logic project. We likely won't find the place unless we find the map to all of the bunkers in the Preheville BOP, and even then it's in a discreet corner of the map and is guarded by a centaur, a creature that seems to be a marriage between a horse and a human. But given the horse's possible association to Alll-mer, I do wonder if it's perhaps something else. In any case, the smart thing to do is avoid it. Inside the bunker, we find that nature is in the process of reclaiming it, with patches of grass here and there. We'll also find disparate body parts, some of which have been sewn together, and we actually recognise what this is. Throughout Preheville, we can be attacked by crude enemies made from body parts, called the Sojobs. They're not a particularly tough enemy, especially if you're in a party. All you need to do is destroy its 3 heads. But we can talk with it. We ask, "What are you?" They respond, "We are many. The lady made us like this. Each of us struggled, but it's better this way." We'll say, "We don't need to fight." To which they respond, "Under the moon, each of us has to fight. Only joining together can you prevent that bloody fate. You've stepped into the world of survival horror, and there's only one way to survive." They're all kind of giant arseholes, though they do say something interesting. Apparently their death and rebirth as the Sojobs has made them immune to the effects of Rare. The tunnel is abandoned, or at least it seems to be at first, until we find a human centipede reference. Just as a point of speculation, I believe that all of these human arts and crafts projects are either Bremen soldiers or members of the NLU, possibly both. Leave it to the Sulfur Cult to bring people together. The next creature we see is the Living Flesh, a blob of sewn together humans that patrols the bunker for its master, Stitches. Stitches will appear towards the end of the bunker and pursue us, needle in hand. Stitches isn't that strong of an opponent, so how she took over the bunker is a mystery. It's likely that she had help from the other sulfur cultists in town. If she does beat us in combat, she'll attach us to the human centipede, which sounds like a fate worse than death, but honestly it may beat moonscorching. Stitches doesn't have a mouth, and should we attempt to communicate, she'll enthusiastically mumble at us. Unless Dawn is in the party, Stitches will make a gesture, but it's hard to say what exactly she's trying to get across. Upon death, we can have Dawn examine the body. The person looks to have a rather normal female body, a little bit more muscular than usual perhaps, but nothing out of the ordinary. She has sewn her mouth partly shut, and there appears to be more sewn cuts scattered around her body. Their purpose is unknown, but they do distort her face beyond recognition. Dawn stops talking. He looks shaken up. His eyes are wide as he stares at the woman. "What's wrong?" we ask. To which he'll say, "Let's just go. I really need fresh air." That's the second weird reaction Dawn has had to a sulfur cultist, and playing as him will understand why he's so shaken. She eerily reminds you of someone. The more you entertain the idea, the more certain you become of this haunting realization. No matter how disfigured her face would be, you would always recognize your wife, Elise. This woman has her appearance, you are 100% certain of this now. But it's impossible. She's dead. You hope that it's only your mind that is crumbling here. You wish Elise has her rest now. Stitches is certainly the daughter of the Baron, and fiancée of Dawn. In his backstory, Dawn came to Preheville to investigate her murder. He found her body in a strange ritual circle, having been sacrificed by the Baron. Through some means, she's been resurrected, and she's come to Preheville in service of the Sulfur God, as if this game needed more reasons for Dawn to be sad. Stitches being Elise would also explain why Dawn, using the power of Sylveon, couldn't resurrect her, for the same reason other sulfur cultists aren't affected by moonscorching, and why the Pocket Cat wasn't tainted by the Depth God, because she already belonged to another master, and it may explain why the Sojobs are immune to Rare's effects, because as they exist now they are servants of Sulfur, I would surmise that it's by this power that they're able to talk and function with no organs. A weird thing to take note of though is that Stitches has the ability to cast healing whispers. Sylvian magic. At first one could assume that Darn simply taught her how, but Darn never explicitly mentions teaching her, and considering that he associates the god with some of his worst memories, why would he? We also know that he trained the Baron in Sylvian magic, who as Needles doesn't use any of it at all. It's a strange addition, and honestly I'm not sure what to make of it. Stitch's face has been deformed, but the rest of her body is covered, besides her hands, which seem to be bleeding. I wonder if this signals that she's not actually very good at sewing. Stitches, unlike the others, has no blue paint. Her neck looks bluish, but to my eye it looks more like all dead skin, but on that I'm not really certain. But if I'm right, then the circumstances of her death and the lack of blue face paint make me wonder if a sacrifice to Sulfur becomes a slave to the god in some way. The Sojobs imply in their dialogue that this may be the case, and it should be said that Darn's refusal to share this information is likely why he fails to really uncover what's going on with Sulfur, and why he continues to be haunted by the Pocket Cat should he survive Termina. But in any event, we move on to the Jester Herald of the Apocalypse. At the very beginning of the game, we're stuck in a bizarre surrealist dream, where we encounter monsters and gods. And at the end of it, we're confronted by Percule, who tells us that he is the servant of the trickster moon god Rare, and then invites us to participate in the Termina festival, what he describes as a jubilee of cosmic proportion. He tells us pretty straightforwardly that we're in a battle royal, since the 14 of you are such late additions to the party. Your days are already running short. The festival will reach its climax in just 3 days. This dialogue implies that the original festival maybe took place over weeks or even months. In town, we find posters featuring Percule's face, asking people to report to them should they have a dream about him. I think these posters were most likely distributed by the church. We know from Donovan's house that the church was aware of Termina, and in the church's basement we find several moon-scorched. So I would speculate that the Church of Ulmer were trying to contain the influence of Rare. We can also find a film reel just outside of the church that depicts a man slowly turning into a bobby over the course of hours. In the first game, we can actually ask the new gods about Percule, and they'll tell us. Percule, and the group associated with that figure, you might recognize them by the body paint covering their faces and body. They are but leeches, leeching on the older gods, pursuing their own agenda, miserable figures. This then is some confirmation that the Janitor and Needles are at least in league with Percule, all three boasting blue face paint. If we're playing as Osar in the introduction, he'll recognise Percule as a deity. Osar is the most well-read of the contestants by far, and according to him, Percule is a deity that is associated with Termina and Rare, and has been around for centuries. Information about the festival is murky, but it is often associated with times of great turmoil. Many massacres in history have been blamed on the deity and the moon. Percule is likely on par with the new gods in terms of raw power. His ability to deflect magical damage, that even comes in the form of weapons like Sabbath, would pretty much make the Fellowship totally ineffective against the guy. Whenever we go to sleep, we meet with Percule, who doesn't have a whole lot to say, only imploring us to kill the other contestants and come to the tower. Now, when first playing Termina, there's no clear objective for what to do, or how to actually complete the game. So most players will probably take the Perkinator up on his offer around day 2, day 3. Once all of the others are dead and we make it to the tower, not only will Percule be more conversational, it'll be getting him to shut up that's the trick. Percule says a lot of things during this exchange, not all of it helpful. He first congratulates us, and depending on whether or not we manage to win Termina in time, he'll make us an offer. If we win Termina after the end of day 2, Percule will only offer us freedom, but that freedom is conditional on killing the demon jester and the pervert moon. But if we win the festival before day 3, he'll offer us an opportunity to join the Sulfur, but if we accept, we must first kill him. These are endings B and C of the game respectively, but before all of this, Percule will drop some pretty major lore bombs, and or lie multiple times to us, before he reveals his true allegiances to Sulfur. His first claim is that the moon god Rare, like all of the other old gods before him, has left the earth, and that only his traces remain. You might still be able to harness some of their powers, but like the festival, it is just a faint voice from the past that grants you those gifts. Maybe that is evidence of their true strength, that even in their absence, and in some cases death, their powers still linger in this world, but without the consciousness behind these powers, their traces are nothing more than any other force of nature. That force is not there to help you, harm you, or be worshipped by you. It just exists. This is by far the wildest claim he makes, by the way. Not just the part about Rare leaving, but also his opinion on what the old god traces actually are, claiming that they're just raw cosmic power without true will. But this clearly isn't true. In Fear and Hunger we can encounter the traces of Grogoroth, and he'll demonstrate a clear intelligence when talking to us. We find him at the heart of darkness. From his appearance in our conversation, it's as though he's there with a specific purpose in mind. Perculae implies that the old gods act without bias or favour, they just are. There is cut content where Perculae outright suggests that it was humanity that gave the gods the ability to personify themselves, I suppose in a similar way to the gods of Warhammer or Michael Moorcock's work, or even the idea of evil from Berserk, where the human subconscious gives these beings power and the ability to manifest themselves in the first place. Even Legard alludes to this idea in the first game if we find him in the Void, suggesting then that the gods might not actually be gods, but rather the created. It makes sense why this part of Perculae's dialogue was cut though, as it does complicate a conversation whose revelations already complicate the game's lore as it is. Talking more, Perculae will say, so, what is the function of the festival if it lacks a greater purpose? We decided to give it one. The we in question is obviously the Sulfur cult, and extrapolating on this, he'll say, the effect it has on people creates ample opportunity to grow our ranks, and shed blood for our master. For hundreds of years we have followed wherever the moon god took us, and we reaped his harvest instead, living and breathing from the chaos that ensues. Of course we strive for the illustrious heights mentioned many times over, but to get there we must climb a mountain of slain sacrificial lambs. So Perculae and the Sulfur cult used the festival of Termina to recruit new members, and I don't think this is a lie, but I do have to wonder why the only other Sulfur cultists we find in Preheville are all recent converts, with Needles, the janitor and Stitches all seemingly becoming Sulfur cultists just a month or two ago. Perculae will expand on this. To truly gain Sulfur's favour, you need to make sacrifices. Human sacrifices, the bloodier the better. All the souls you sent to our master, now boiling in the presence of his never-ending hatred. To finish your transformation, I need to send you too to his sulfuric cage. You have faced death head-on. The only thing missing is facing the death of yourself. Perculae suggests that the people we killed during the festival were sent to Sulfur, who I'll remind you is in hell, so it seems that becoming a Sulfur cultist works similarly to demonhood in Berserk. One has to make a human sacrifice to achieve the new form, and that sacrifice will as a result be condemned to hell, which does make me wonder if every servant of Sulfur joins him willingly. I did briefly speculate that Stitches was not a willing servant of the god, and likewise I believe her stitched creations are also unwilling servants of Sulfur, no longer being subject to the moon god's influence. And I do believe another kind of creature in Preheville was born from the sulfuric pits, after being sacrificed by Sulfur cultists. The neighbours are an odd creature we encounter in Preheville. There are some to be found in the sewers, but most of them are found in the mould apartments. If we kill them in combat, Dan will give us this analysis of them. The hulking thing seems to have gone through a large-scale transformation. There are signs in its anatomy that the thing was once a human. Its skin has become scorched, and it's hard to puncture. Its arms have gained mass, and they now look more like bags of potatoes. And finally, its head seems to have transformed in a form that emphasizes mouth and tongue. There is no known medical ailment that could cause something this big. At first, it seems like they might be a result of moon scorching, and it is possible that they are, but their proximity to a major location in the town associated with Sulfur makes me think otherwise. The neighbours also have an unusual tongue fixation that Sulfur also seems to have. Okay, I admit I'm pulling at straws with this one, but stay with me here. A counter to this theory though lies in Marco, who moonscorches into a similar looking being, though unlike the neighbours, he's not a quadruped, and doesn't have a weird tongue, and when we kill Marco's moonscorched form, Dan will have this description for it. It does look like some kind of growth or scorched cancer tissue. Here Dan deliberately mentions the cancer tissue that's common in moonscorched forms, but doesn't appear referenced in the neighbours description. If my theory about the neighbours is true, the amount in the sewers might indicate that Needles came to Preheville through its sewer system, making sacrifices to Sulfur of people cowering from the moon god's gaze as he arrived. Perculae will describe what becoming a Sulfur cultist requires. Do not threat. It is like the summer and the winter at the same time. Scorching sun burning your skin, while the long tendrils of the cold freeze you from the inside out. Only when you rise back from those dark pits, only then will you be a true representative of the cult of Sulfur. The empty man-made morals, that hollow weight stirring deep inside you, all carved out. You will finally know what it means to truly be free. From the first line, it seems that Perculae is essentially describing going to hell and suffering torture, and the Sulfur God's association with the idea of freedom is an interesting note. Put a pin in that. Fighting Perculae is a war of attrition, especially if you're a magic build. One of Alll-mer's boons is protection from otherworldly powers, and not only is Perculae protected, those very same powers are deflected, until his wing shield is destroyed. Something odd about Perculae is the state of his torso. He appears to be rotting away. When asked, "Are you a human?" he'll say, "I once was." At least according to the loosest meaning of that term. I was lucky enough to stumble upon a festival, just like you. Afterwards was when I was truly born. I do wonder if this is what Perculae's mortal body looked like before he was sent to the sulfuric pits. Something that's wild to note is that Nashra will not say a single thing during this exchange, almost like he's learning at the same time as we are. Nashra himself is an advocate for chaos, and the Sulfur God seems to be a god of chaos, or at least a god of freedom, so Nashra's probably just found his new favourite god, with Perculae outright saying that to join Sulfur is to embrace chaos, to embrace the idea that a dream of a peaceful utopia is just that, a dream. To the Sulfur cult, the only power is truth and violence. Perculae will also give us an insight into who the true enemies of the Sulfur God are. You are just another pawn in the greater scheme of things. Just another fool led by the so-called new gods, who are nothing more than dirty little sinners like yourself. The only difference being that they devoured their way to the top of the pyramid before anyone else had the chance. So Perculae and the Sulfur cult stand in opposition to the new gods, who in Termina seek to create a god for humanity. We do know another character who really dislikes the new gods, and has a weird association to Alll-mer, the Heartless One, who I speculated was a new god who sided with Alll-mer after his ascension, and helped him in his purge of the other new gods. I do wonder if the Heartless One is a Sulfur follower, perhaps the first to arrive in Preheville, which is why we find her locked away within the Church of Alll-mer. The priests may have done it themselves. Perculae expands on his hatred for the new gods. What do you call the starvation and poverty the world has faced? Horrible occurrences in history that were inevitable bumps in the path of progress. What would you call the last two great wars, where hundreds of thousands, no, millions perished? They are but a part of the greater scheme, the sinners pulling the strings from the grand hall they reside in to further establish their position. That is vile, if you ask me. I trust no power to any man. Do you? The new gods are desperate to shake off the chains of the old, and in the first game they view themselves as the inheritors of the old god's legacy, and the true stewards of Mahab. As a group, they are nothing if not ambitious. I've speculated before that the new gods may have assassinated Alll-mer in the year 400, and if that were true, it may explain Perculae's animosity towards them. According to Perculae, Sulfur exists outside of the greater scheme. In cut dialogue, he tells us that Sulfur was a deity driven out and chained in the pit for all eternity by his fellow old gods, which is a story we've not yet heard in any source. But what exactly is it that makes Sulfur such an appealing choice as a prospective deity? Well, according to Perculae, humans were born to suffer. They possess the eternal hunger that will never be satisfied. To fool themselves, they came up with rules and routine. to help pass the time, an artificial sense of achievement, self-defined attributes to determine who is good, bad, successful, or a failure, living in cages of their own making. If you live in a cage, you are never free. You need to tear that prison down brick by brick. You must strip yourself of man-made morals and ethics. Perculae parrots similar rhetoric to Nashra in the first game. Humans are beings of chaos. To try and order them is to create an inherent contradiction, and order itself is not a good thing, but rather a cage. And speaking of cages, Perculae mentions the greater scheme multiple times in this interaction, and while he may say that the Sulfur cult just follows Rare around like homicidal groupies, that, at the very least, is far from true. There is something to be said about Perculae and his battle to the death. I do believe Perculae is being disingenuous. If we manage to kill the Jester, I don't actually think he really dies here. I mean, he's already basically a corpse anyway, but if we examine the heads of the decrepit priests, we'll get an item description that suggests the head is alive in some way. Meanwhile, if we examine the head of Needles, we get this description: the severed head of Needles. For some reason, you get a feeling that his presence still lingers in those eyes. The janitor's face likewise has a permanent smile affixed to it, and the bodies of the Sulfur cultists remain tense, even after death. I suspect that, like Alll-mer and Sulfur, the true followers of the beings can't die, and will eventually return. But what, if anything, is Perculae and the Sulfur cult's role in the greater scheme? According to Perculae, the cult of Sulfur has spent the last few centuries following around the moon god as he initiates Termina events, leeching off of his power. The janitor talks about Rare similarly in its diary, as if the moon god's presence is an afterthought. Perculae makes it sound like this event in Preheville is just like any other, a test to find people worthy of becoming agents of the Sulfur god. But Perculae is a liar. Rare has not come to Preheville arbitrarily. He, at the very least, is not an unconscious form of nature made manifest, but has a clear and distinct will of his own. And Perculae and the cult of Sulfur are not in Preheville on a mere recruitment drive. There's a grander game at play, and it revolves around the Logic Project. The Logic Project is humankind's attempt to build their own god, free from the confines of the Old Ones. But the logic is frail and vulnerable during the events of Termina, while it dwells beneath the earth in the White Bunker. It needs to be activated elsewhere, 3 elsewheres to be precise. Bunker 7, the bunker in the Deep Woods, and the bunker beneath the church. We first meet Needles at Bunker 7, where he beheads Tanaka. I don't believe the Needles cutscene is triggered though if Abella is already moonscorched, likely because the telelectroscope didn't need a guardian anymore, as the Shogner stalks the tunnels. Stitches is in the bunker in the Deep Woods, where we can once again find one of the 3 telelectroscopes that need to be activated. The final one is beneath the Church of Alll-mer, deep below in its catacombs, and the church has essentially been taken over by the Crimson Fathers, who are servants of Sulfur. The logic itself is found in the White Bunker, the endgame location, that can only be accessed once the other 3 bunkers have been activated. We don't find any Sulfur cultists here though. Well, that is until you come across a room that looks like a workshop, and in the room we find an area covered in rubble, almost like there was a Rare portal there that the Bremen forces quickly covered up before a certain nudist could come out of it, which might explain why the janitor is stuck in the Rare dimension where we found him. The Sulfur cult have clear designs on the Logic Project, with Termina even coming to an abrupt end upon its activation. But what is the Sulfur cult's real objective exactly? Well, that can be answered with the cubes. At the beginning of the game, the janitor has us craft cubes, covered in the sigils of the old gods. We know from Arena's engrave skill that a sigil carved into a human bestows power from the god the sigil represents, with the ritual circles functioning in a similar manner. The Kaiser himself has the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger excavated in an attempt to find the Cube of the Depths, an object capable of warping time itself, that seems to be covered in all of the major god sigils. So we know for certain that the sigils of the old gods and the ascended ones can grant power. How or if the Cube of the Depths is different than any common variety cube is never explained though. If we use a sigil in the game, we gain affinity with that god, and seemingly fall further under its influence. When we do activate the logic, we see on our chest 2 cubes, with the Venushka signal carved into it. So I would speculate that the Sulfur cult originally came to Preheville not out of some cosmic coincidence, or even as Perculae suggests, to find new blood for Sulfur, but but rather to influence the logic god, to attach their own cubes to it, and ultimately hijack it from the god and the new gods. Sulfur is a god that is barely known. The Church of Alll-mer teach of the sulfuric pits, but not necessarily about the being itself. Logic would presumably immediately be on the level of the other mainline old and ascended gods, but with the end of the war, and the city of Prehevil being handed to the Kaiser, the sulfur cult likely had to act fast, and thus it became imperative to have Termina. It's hard to say whether Rare himself went there independently, or whether he was guided. If we defeat Perculae, we'll get this moment where previously invisible chains attached to Rare are broken, and he descends the earth for a fight, indicating perhaps that Rare's will has been fully taken over, or subverted. But in either case, with the arrival of the Kaiser and the White Bunker being lost to them, the cult instead likely decided to prevent the logic activating, if they couldn't have it themselves. Now there is the question of why the Sulfur cult wouldn't just go to the White Bunker and fight, but I believe that would be a uniquely bad idea. The Kaiser is an exceptionally strong opponent, maybe more powerful than your average new god, and while Perculae is likewise powerful, the other cultists are not. Stronger than your average person, sure, but not on par with a god, and that's not even taking into account the Brahmin elites and the platoon. By the time the game starts, the Sulfur cult's only win state at that point was a stalemate, so they take and hold all the bunkers. Because while the Kaiser would have no problem dealing with them himself, if he left the bunker to do so, they'd just attack while he was gone. Which is why the contestants come in. They can activate the logic project without jeopardizing its safety, which is why it's in Perculae's and the Sulfur cult's best interest to kill them all. There is the question of what Rare wants from all of this. I don't believe he's just some mindless arbitrary cosmic force, but rather a being with its own motives and will. I'd speculate here that Rare is allowing the Sulfur cult to use his power to enable their war against the new gods and the Logic Project. By the end of Termina, the Logic and Sulfur are both ascended gods, humans who have acquired the power of the Old Ones. And I believe that Rare, as an enemy of mankind, is attempting to incite a civil war between the two factions. But that's for another video. So we've looked at the Sulfur cult and its followers, and speculated on its true designs for Prehevil and the Logic Project. But despite the video being so long, we still haven't answered a really important question. What exactly is Sulfur, and what is its relationship to Alll-mer? Alll-mer has two origin stories. The first describes a man who independently ascends to godhood on the cross. The second is the story of the perfect man, designed by Petruvia and given life by Sylvan, who is ordained to one day ascend. I've said that I believe both stories are true, and I'd like to now elaborate on why. In dialogue that was cut that I found on the wiki, Perculae had this to say when we talked to him. Before the exodus of the old gods, there existed one that was banished from the pantheon. As he was chained deep beneath the earth's surface, this fallen one, this fallen god, he was never able to leave this world. He exists beyond the eternal cycle, and beyond the greater scheme of things. To celebrate the chaos, we gather souls for the fallen one. We know that the god he's talking about here would be Sulfur, who stands in contrast to the old gods and the new, both of whom want a natural order to exist, with them at the top of it. I do wonder if the creation of Sulfur is what caused the old gods to leave the world in the first place. Sulfur cultists, according to Perculae, have the fickle moral systems of mankind cut away, returning to a twisted state of nature. And Sulfur seems to be the result of that, but for Alll-mer, his more base desires and evil inclinations cut away and confined. But what if it wasn't Sulfur that was confined to the sulfuric pits, but rather Alll-mer, the first human ascended god? The Alll-mer that we read about in the Skin Bible seems contradictory in nature. The most glaring part of his backstory to me is the claim that he supported an old world order. Essentially, during his life, the new gods ruled the world. What happened to the old gods at this point is unknown. There's no recorded history in the game before Alll-mer's birth, but the other ascended gods, Fear and Hunger and Logic, are creations of the new gods, not the old. And really, I do have to wonder if Alll-mer was also a new god project that was subverted by the old ones. And if that were the case, Alll-mer would have presented an existential threat to them, much like the other ascended ones do now, which finally brings us to the Man in Black. The Man in Black is a mysterious figure. You may know him by the name Black Kalev, the goat that loiters around the woodman's house. In my old-time video, I talk a deal about the woodman's cuckolding, and the real cuckolder is the Man in Black. I guess that makes the woodsman the Watcher? Anyway, in the basement of the Watcher's house, we'll find his dead wife, who seems to have used her own blood to try and draw a rare sigil. She fails, but we can finish it for her, and find ourselves in a rare dimension, where an odd fellow materializes out of the ether. Another one heeds my call. Just remember that you came to me, not the vice versa. Tell me, O naive one, do you believe in the pitch-black darkness? This opening line is a parallel to the conversations that we have with Pocket Cat, who also talks about the light and the dark like he's in a bad Star Wars fanfic. Pocket Cat, though, seems to be talking about depression, while the man in black is talking in a more literal sense. Interestingly, he speaks in a faux Old English way, O naive one, whereas pretty much every other character in the game talks as though they're from the 21st century. Clearly, this is an attempt to highlight him as being really old, even older than Nashra. Continuing on, he opines, but that is how it was always meant to be. Good on one hand, and the evil on the other. Good can come from the bad, and bad from the good. A constant struggle, a game even. That is how it is meant to be. That is how it was. A man listened to his spirit, and you could tarnish that spirit so easily. So here the man in black is talking about good and evil, and how it's an eternal struggle in every person. Man's soul is fickle and changeable, prone to sin and corruption. Extrapolating on that, why would an ascended gods be any different? Nashra also talks about this topic in his essay The Human Dilemma. There's a cynicism to the way the man speaks that becomes increasingly clear as he goes on. Then people started to worship a new god. A god called the Science. Suddenly everything needed to be calculated before being put into consideration. There is no good or evil beyond this scope. And here the man in black starts talking about scientific progress, and how it not only changes human society, but also our moral ideals. Indeed, much of moral philosophy written in the last few centuries has been a reaction to the Enlightenment. But I think the point he's making here is that science after all exposes superstition, and religious views could be called mere superstition, at least on a surface level reading, by people who maybe don't hold those beliefs themselves. Beyond Good and Evil, incidentally, is the title of the most influential work in this regard, by Nietzsche, a man whose name I can't pronounce, who lays out an argument against traditional morality, in favour of what he calls the will to power, existentialism essentially, wherein a person develops their own internal ethical system. An issue with this philosophy, though, is that the will to power, and the denial of a universal human reality, opens the door to nihilistic thoughts, or questioning ideas that have inherent value. Do not kill is a foundational rule in almost every society, and religion in human history. But should it be? Should murder be okay if somebody is spreading dangerous ideas? Or if they're a danger to themselves or others? Is political violence ever acceptable? I did start writing an entire section on Hobbes and Locke, but it seemed overkill at this point. And to be clear, I'm not advocating for murder or anything, please don't demonetize me. More giving an admittedly extreme example of where this philosophy can ultimately take a person. I would say here that Nietzsche himself rejects nihilism, and views the perfect existentialist as somebody who not only rejects it, but also makes their own meaning, and ultimately loves life. The man in black then is critiquing technological progress, and the philosophical changes that accompany it, and it's not like he doesn't have some point. Nuclear power is a modern invention that's also happened to spawn the creation of the deadliest weapon known to mankind. And we can say in Sulfur's case at least that he is a being of chaos, existing outside of the greater scheme, and not hold to the same standards of the other gods and ascended ones. He's uniquely vicious and vile, and his followers seem to have a zero sense of morality, but the man in black here seems to be talking more directly about the logic god, and to that end we don't really know the god's intentions. It's born from the new god's desire to usurp the old ones, and we have no idea what its moral system would be, if it has any at all. Would its creation spur a new age of technological growth that refuses to acknowledge any moral qualms? Is the suffering of the people of Preheville just a prelude to a new age of cruelty and advancement to come? Depending on how we respond to the man in black, will depend on if Black Caleb joins our party, at which point he'll disappear. But should we mould all of the clay idols that can be found in the rare dimensions into our own image, the man in black will appear and talk to us again. Carving an idol of yourself, I see. Humanity and their endless yearning. I stood next to your celebrated Christ, Alll-mer the Ascended One, as he carved his idol. This is an incredible claim, and if true, it would mean that the man in black is the only person who can give us definitive information on Alll-mer. The man in black's true identity is obscured, with Mythonic suggesting he may have been one of Alll-mer's 12 disciples, which means the man could be a Judas figure, a betrayer, But Judas in most iterations of Christ's story dies, and is even guilt-stricken about his actions. Given the Man in Black's seeming immortality, he's more reminiscent of Cain, who was cursed to wander the world forever after murdering Abel. Aesthetically, and his association to Black Caleb paints him more as a devil or demonic figure. The Man in Black himself is the same contradictory information surrounding himself as Allmer then. But his presence in Preheville is not a coincidence. To condense his true essence, he carved that macabre being from the depths of his subconsciousness, to confront his shadow, the unknowable, the imperfection that obstructed his pursuits of absolution. As one, the Ascended One became two. So it seems certain here that the subconsciousness he refers to as sulfur. Percule also talks about how in the sulfuric pits we will be first hollowed, the constraints of society, its arbitrary morality will be carved away, which brings us to the work of Carl Jung. I've stated before that the moon-scorched forms of the contestants is basically a process where Rare empowers their shadows to overwhelm them. But whereas Rare overwhelms their victims, Sulfur frees them. Sulfur seems to specifically focus on what Jung refers to as the id being our primal instincts. Broadly, it still falls under the shadow, but is more focused on things like hunger, sexual desire, etc., the qualities that make us more akin to animals. And this is clear in his followers, who delight in violence. Mr. Black talks about the shadow in a more literal sense, as if it was a physical thing that Allmer had to deal with before he could truly ascend, rather than a metaphor for an internal struggle. Allmer and Sulfur's story is odd and contradictory even at the best of times, and a Man in Black himself is a reflection of this. Is he a goat or the man? The human form is only able to manifest in Rare's dimensions, places that follow an esoteric dream logic, and perhaps this is relevant. It should be said we shouldn't take the guy as an unbiased, purely honest source though. If the other one had been dug deep within Allmer's subconsciousness, it had to be sent back just as deep so it wouldn't obstruct the newfound order, cast away so that true absolution could be reached. Cast away deep, all the way down to the sulfuric pits. But which one was it that got cast away? The conscious or the subconscious of the Ascended One? And it's here we finally start getting to the point. Essentially he's asking, was it Sulfur that was cast down into the pits, or Allmer himself? By the time of Termina, Sulfur is an obscure figure, with not much information existing about him really, though the mainstream Allmer religion does talk about the sulfuric pits. The Inquisitors specifically talk about it directly, and interestingly associate the place with lies and deception, so it seems that they're a key teaching in the faith of Allmer at the very least. Percule's cut dialogue about the Old God Pantheon discarding a member comes to mind here as well, so I'll lay all my cards out on the table and tell you what I think happened. I believe that Allmer was born a man, that he gained influence and eventually ascended in a manner similar to the girl, mantling a former Old God. But which god? Well, I would say Petruvia, the mysterious architect of mankind. An important detail in their backstory is that Petruvia does not create mankind, but rather copies the appearance of Sylvan, warping the image of the divine into something more crude. Likewise, the servants of Sulfur are not direct creations, but rather cruel pastiches of the people they were before. It invokes the Tolkien quote on evil not being capable of true creation, and I believe that Petruvia actually marries the two-story in Allmer's Skin Bible together, in that Allmer started as an ordinary man who became a god. Allmer really did ascend on the cross, and I believe they ascended using the power of Petruvia. Petruvia, in the myths of the old gods, would then become something akin of a Prometheus figure, gifting humans with the power of the divines. And famously, Prometheus was punished for his transgressions. Petruvia and Allmer are also obsessed with the idea of perfection. The girl was influenced by the Depth God, becoming a dark god in her own right, and ushering in the Cruel Age. And I believe that the being we call Sulfur, who dwells in the sulfuric pits now, possesses the only trait we know Petruvia to have. From the Allmer Skin Bible we find this excerpt. Over time, Petruvia started to see small imperfections here and there. Nothing bothered her more than the idea that her designs are anything but perfect. So she set out to create the perfect human being, the pinnacle of man's potential. That obsession with perfection, for my money, is what influenced Allmer to carve away his shadow in the first place. It's difficult to say whether this carving happened before or after his ascension, but I do believe we can look at the traits that he chose to originally cut. Most importantly, I think, were his wrath and his devotion to the old gods. I think Allmer and Petruvia originally wanted to make something different, better, and the older gods punished them for it, confining the new ascended one, Allmer, in spirit at least, to the sulfuric pits. and allowing his shadow, Sulfur, to reign over mankind, and Mahab in their name. Take all of that with a big grain of salt, mind. There isn't any information on whether Petruvia is an old or new god at all. There is also a compelling argument for Grogoroth being the god Alll-mer ascended from, as Mythonix explained in his video on Sulfur. But nevertheless, the Man in Black is not finished. If you continue carving idols big enough to rival the old world order, you won't know which side of you prevails. It could just as well be you who gets squashed as your shadow runs loose. And it's here we finally get some insight into the Man in Black's motivation. I believe here he's warning us about starting the Logic Project. The god is not confined by morality, but rather logic, a cold and cruel mistress. With the god in Fear and Hunger and the Logic Project, mankind is creating its own gods in the Fear and Hunger universe, its own idols, and he's trying to convince us not to go through with it, using Alll-mer as an example of what could go wrong. Interestingly, I don't think he's an ally of Sulfur, as he's willing to fight Perculate with us, and if the disciple theory is correct, I would speculate further that he may not have betrayed Alll-mer at all, that Alll-mer may have espoused the New World Order originally, about merging mankind with the divinity of the Old Ones. And when Sulfur was resurrected, he rejected the god's advocacy for a return to the old ways and was cursed, to be confined eternally to the body of a goat, only able to manifest as a man in the domain of rare. Don't feel too bad for him though, he did cook the woodsman and destroy the life of him and his wife, and he's a giant carrot-stealing dick in general. So based on everything we've talked about in this video, I'm finally going to answer the question of what exactly Sulfur is. When we read any source on Alll-mer, it describes him as brutal, slaughtering the kings and new gods of the time upon his ascension. Sulfur meanwhile also seems to delight in violence. The question then is, are the two being separate or one? Well, it's complicated. As the Man in Black says, good can come from bad, and bad from good. So I believe that the Man in Black was telling the truth here, and that Alll-mer the Redeemer was cast into the sulfuric pits, to suffer for the sins of mankind and Petruvia for all eternity, while Sulfur, the Shadow, would take his other half's place, becoming the king of Mahab, essentially making him a usurper, because Alll-mer after all would be the true king, though I do think there was only ever one body between them. And it's here we should talk about Gnosticism, an old offshoot of Christianity, but more importantly, the god of Gnosticism, the Demiurge, an incompetent creator god, who in Gnosticism is quite obsessed with materialism and keeping people separate from the divine temporal. Likewise, the old gods do not want humanity to get on their own level, and I believe Sulfur was their first attempt to prevent this, with the new god Trap becoming their second. Sulfur then would be the incompetent god of the universe, with the other members of the old god pantheon possibly functioning as archons of Gnosticism. I should say though that it's not a like-for-like comparison, and Gnosticism and Jungian philosophy don't exactly seamlessly mix. Though weirdly, they have also influenced Berserk and Enderal, my two other favourite fantasy stories. Weird that it happened 3 times. Sulfur would be the one to rule humanity for 400 years. It's possible the old gods aided Sulfur in this endeavour, fearing what Alll-mer would become or the threat he may pose to them if left unchecked. And the body of Alll-mer we find in the Tomb of the Gods then would actually be Sulfur. The two provide more or less the same magical boons, protection from magic, and access to blood weapons. But if Sulfur was masquerading as Alll-mer, what has the real Alll-mer been up to this entire time? The old gods are eternal, unchangeable, but mankind is not. It's prone to corruption and deviancy, and its soul is malleable. And why would a human god be any different? Alll-mer, since his fall, has become a god of hate, separate from the greater scheme and the rest of the old gods' pantheon. And while Sulfur was his shadow, his darker, more barbaric impulses personified, since then the original Alll-mer has become twisted, suffering in the sulfuric pits for what must seem like an eternity. Now he is the Shadow. What happened to Sulfur after he died is difficult to say. Maybe the two merged upon his death in the year 400. Maybe he just dissipated into the ether. Or maybe he's still out there somewhere, who knows though. And the being in the sulfuric pits actually being Alll-mer might explain why he's so powerful, why he was able to overwhelm the influence of the other guy at the church according to Osar. And of course why the White Old apartments become what they are after the janitor's rampage. To heavily influence a part of the world, he merely needs to be invoked, and it's likely why he wants the Logic Project. Then he could allow the entire world to know about his true existence. On a final note, Sulfur cultists all seem to be fairly happy about their lives, unbound from the constraints of morality. Returned to what Hobbes might call the state of nature, but But they aren't just violent animals. In fact, they seem to view their violence as an art form in its own right, destruction and creation becoming something more intimately human. But time is a funny thing in Fear and Hunger. Once an old god or ascended one comes into existence, it's always existed. We see this with the lingering influence of the Depth God, and even Venushka, if Enki is to be believed, and the god is truly dead, meaning there really could be two distinct Alll-mers out there, the Redeemer and the Sulfuric. But admittedly, a lot of what I've discussed here is theoretical. Fear and Hunger's lore is by and large kept vague, but what is undisputedly true is that Sulfur exists, and his existence is bad news for everyone else.